you have a particular expertise that is more aligned with the expertise of Seb Gorka, right?
Right.
And so reading that document from a counterterrorism context is you're getting lost in translation. Mm-hmm. This is fundamentally a white Christian nationalist document. And as we go into this summer of celebrating the 250, right, and going forward into the next 250, these documents become a roadmap for white Christian nationalist control over all of us. And I one thing that you talked about in your writing this week, this week, we're airing on Sunday. It's still this week. The documents, this document, here's the counterterrorism strategy document. It's like 16 short pages. As you can see,
a lot of repetition, a lot of things repeat.
I mean, it is pretty sloppy if we're being honest, but that may be the point. They say, he says that some of these groups, the ones we mentioned, the Antifas, the radical trans groups, which is so weird to me, they have adopted ideologies that are antithetical to freedom, right? But freedom is another word that gets lost in translation for us normies, right? What does he mean by freedom? This is so interesting to me.
When Christian nationalists use words like freedom and liberty, you and I have a set thing. We know what we think that means. We have the right to live our lives and live and let live and make our own choices and have control of our own minds. That's what most Americans, rugged individualism, even for some Americans, is what freedom and liberty mean. But in Christian nationalism, that's not what those words mean. And they started using this in Project 2025. And in early February of 2024, I pointed out that one of the promises, the 4 promises that they made in that document, was to secure all Americans' rights to enjoy the blessings of liberty. And they define that as Americans are free. We have the liberty not to do what we want, but what we ought. And that exact language is in Project 2025. That is their definition of freedom. And as a former white Christian nationalist who was steeped in that ideology as a child and teenager, that was a Bible verse. I knew it immediately. It's a Bible verse from Romans, written by the Apostle Paul, that says we are here not to do what we want, but what we ought. And so that when you look at freedom through that lens, that means Seb Gorka is saying you have the freedom to do what you ought. And what I say you ought to do is this interpretation of the Bible that I'm going to force on you, because you ought to do this. That's the only thing you have freedom and liberty to do, according to my reading of Scripture. So I am going to force that on you. You don't have the freedom to do what you want. You don't have the freedom to live and let live. You don't have the freedom to be a rugged individual. You don't have the freedom to your own mind. You have the freedom to do what you ought. And here is what you ought to do. You ought to be a white Christian nationalist. That's what he means when he uses the word freedom or liberty.
They even,
everyone like him mean that.
And in the document, and you outline this so beautifully, everyone, if you're just joining, this is Unholy Ground with me and Andra Watkins from For Such a Time as This. And she's been writing this week about counterterrorism, of all things. But if you're just joining, you'll be surprised to learn that terrorism is conducted by non-Christian nationalists, according to Seb Gorka. They also, in the document, and again, you outline this, talk about the founding fathers and, the pursuit of liberty, the pursuit of freedom, they're like, yes, they did say that, but it should be maybe more aligned with the concept of the pursuit of blessedness, right? And freedom and liberty are not things that you, as you said, want to achieve, but something you ought to, you have a responsibility. Like, that's what the Constitution is about. Not about your freedoms, but about your responsibilities. And liberty and freedom, they further say, is actually not what we think of as liberty and freedom. Liberty and freedom means getting married. Oh, there's my stupid emoji again. I will never turn that off because it always comes up at the exact wrong time. But I love it. So getting married, being white is liberty and freedom, right? Sort of having dominion over your woman or your women.
Yeah.
That's what liberty and freedom entails for them. And so this document is, it may be a vague strategy, but it's really a statement of purpose.
Yeah. And, we have to back up a couple of steps from that point, because for a Christian nationalist, true liberty, true freedom is not of this earth. It's not a state you live in with your neighbors, in your communities, in your cities and towns, and in your countries. True freedom to a Christian nationalist like Seb Gorka is spiritual freedom. It is rejecting the nature that you were born with, to not to do what you want, not what you ought. And you reject that nature, you lay it aside for the greater nature, the greater spiritual choice of doing what you ought, which is following white Christian nationalist Bible, living the white Christian nationalist life. So once you understand that that's really what he's talking about, rejecting that old nature and taking on this new nature that, and when I would sit in a Christian nationalist pew as a child, salvation, which is a relatively recent concept, the concept of getting saved came out of 1830s revivals in the pre-Victorian era. So, the concept of getting saved is not in the Bible. It's relatively new, but it was always preached to me as the ultimate freedom. You're throwing off your old nature and you're putting on the armor of God. You're accepting. And armor of God was used a lot. There's that warfare imagery again that I got, as a child. So that is really what they're talking about when they're talking about freedom and liberty. And it's really, really important to understand that is we are going to force everyone to kneel. We're going to force everyone to do what they ought. And anyone who refuses to do what they ought will be a terrorist. That's really what they're saying. That's really what this is about.